Achtung, the Vox of YouTube. Welcome back to my newest sub-series, Let's Explain Victoria 2, A House Divided. As you can see, things are a bit different since last time we left here. For instance, Prussia is blue, and there's a new scenario up here, A House Divided. Yes, House Divided is the first, what I call, major expansion pack for Victoria 2. Not only does it add a whole scenario based on the Civil War, the American Civil War, of course, between the Confederate States and the USA, it also has many changes to the map in the 1861 scenario. If you want my advice, if you want to play as a Romanian state, play here because it's more unified. You could be a revanchist Italy, trying to get the Papal States back, or you could just launch a big old campaign from the Ottoman Empire to try to get all your influence back, because you have beat the Egyptians down to the Suez Canal, but no further than that. But those are just some examples of scenarios. As you can see, the map isn't sharply different, and to be fully honest, yes, some of the things that they kept the same really shouldn't have been, but pretty much that's the extent of it. It's good for forming a unification nation pretty quickly, because almost all of them start very near it. But you don't play Victoria 2 just to hear me gab on about the Ottoman Empire and influence. No, you listen to me babble about the actual things that have changed. So, I'll load up a game and show you some of the major things right now. Well, this looks different, when in fact it is. One of the most obvious things that A House Divided added is an entire row of new map modes, ranging from RGO output, which will show you, say, this province is Slovakia producing grain. So if you click on a grain producing one, you can see all the places in the world that produce grain. Or this for coal. Obviously, there's very few of it in South America. And population density, party loyalty, all the way through relations, which just shows you all the places which you have relatively good relations with. It's probably one of the lesser map modes, but it still is a good thing to note if you're trying to keep track of something on a new sphere of influence, on the new sphere of influence system. But that's enough about that. Another new thing is this little button right here, Justify War. In an attempt to try and curb all the off-the-gun wars that tended to happen in the earlier editions of Victoria 2, now you have to justify your war. You can get through a whole justification completely infamy-free, which is one of the neat things. You can go through and get a casus belli without having to actually take an infamy hit if you're lucky enough. But the biggest thing that this offers is that states that are huge warmongering states that tend to have 1,000 war goals actually can't. Do keep in mind though, if you start out with a casus belli like Prussia and Austria do on Denmark, then you can still use any casus belli you have, but the amount of random ones you'll get will just happen so considerably less. And as you can probably guess, nationalism and imperialism helps us along too by increasing the output sharply. That is the most major addition to A House Divided. And hold on here, folks. Another important thing is that your politics screen has changed quite a bit, but firstly, more importantly, before I cover that, I must say that there's a new thing in the national focuses, party loyalty national focuses. If you set these into place, then eventually, over time, whoever you set it towards will start gaining popularity in an area, which is good if you're aiming for a certain type of government, particularly liberal and socialist, because they'll influence your upper house more than anything. And having reforms is always good. In addition, there's also the new school system reform, which gives you education efficiency. And movements! There aren't very many movements right now because I just started the game, kind of obviously. But as the game goes on, eventually movements will start. Movements are essentially rebellions light. There are a bunch of citizens who essentially got together and said that they want this to happen. They can be anything from wanting more of a vote right to people who just want to outright break free of your nation and join another nation. You can suppress them with your suppression points, but if you do that, they might come back as proper rebels, which are now displayed over here. The trick is knowing what you want to actually send to rebels, knowing will actually be popular enough so that you want a rebellion so you can just crush revolters, or unpopular. And knowing what you can suppress, that'll just make them shrink away. And obviously, when to just abstain from suppressing at all. I'll give you some good examples by just simply playing the game for a few minutes. And as you can see, a couple of lost wars later, we have the Iraqi Liberation Movement, the Albanian Liberation Movement, and the Bulgarian Liberation Movement. Obviously, I'm not Austria at this point. I also have rebels. On the right there, Armenians, reactionaries, and anarcho-liberals. For the most part, you won't have to worry too much about movements, unless you're trying to stay always empowered, essentially. It's less of a threat and more of a guideline on what your people want you to do. Rebels are what you should be more worried about, but as it stands, I find that unless you really pressure them, movements hardly ever go violent without extreme provocation into doing so. Thus, I would have to say that this feature, it was a good plan, but it was not that very well implemented. Either way, that's about enough for this week. It was a very short episode, but I'll make up for it with next week's considerably longer episode about all the different map modes. So until next week, see you then.